When my apartment burned down, I called my parents. Mom said, "Not our problem. Should have been more careful." Then the fire investigator asked, "Do you know who had access to your apartment last week? Because we found something at the scene." What he showed me made my blood run cold. The evidence bag weighed nothing. That's the part my brain kept snagging on. Sitting in that gray room in the Kent County Fire Investigation Office with my hands flat on the table like I'd been told to keep them there. Deputy Fire Marshal Raymond Cassell slid the bag across and it made almost no sound. And inside it was a small brass lighthouse with its enamel bubbled up black like burned sugar. And I thought, how does something that light do this much damage? "Take your time," Cassell said. 21 years with the Michigan State Police Fire Investigation Unit, silver crew cut, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest grandpa." He had the particular patience of men who wait for other people to say the thing they already know. I could have lied. I want to be honest about that, because everything that happened over the next 6 weeks came out of the 4 seconds I spent deciding. There was a version of that morning where I said, "No idea, never seen it," and let the lab and the phone records do their work without my fingerprints anywhere near it. I thought about it. My mouth was dry enough that swallowing hurt, but I'm a hospice nurse. My whole job is being the person in the room who says the true thing when everybody else is managing around it. I've told a 42-year-old father that the medication wasn't going to fix it. I've told a woman that the rattling sound in her husband's chest was normal and that he wasn't suffering, and then held her while she screamed anyway. So I said, "I bought 2 of those. In 2001, at the gift shop at Big Sable Point." Cassell didn't move. "And the other one? I gave it to my sister. Christmas 9 years ago. I had them both re-lacquered because the brass had gone green." He wrote that down. Then he asked me to spell Delia's last name. And I did. And something in my chest came loose and dropped. The way you feel when an elevator starts before you're ready. "Ms. Myers," he capped the pen, "I need you to understand what happens now. From this point forward, you do not contact your sister. Not a text. Not through your father. Nothing. She's going to call me. She's going to do a lot of things," he said. Let her. The lighthouse trip was the summer my dad got laid off from Steelcase. I was 8, Delia was 11, and my parents had that grinding, teeth-clenched way of talking to each other through walls that I didn't understand yet, but could feel in my stomach at the dinner table. Nana Ruthie showed up on a Thursday in her rust-colored Buick and announced we were going to Ludington. She'd already packed a cooler. She didn't ask. Big Sable Point is a 1.5 miles up the beach from the parking lot, and there's no shade, and my sandals filled with sand within about 90 seconds. Delia carried me the last quarter-mile on her back. That's a true thing I have to hold at the same time as everything else. My sister carried me up a beach in 94-degree heat because I was crying and my feet hurt, and she didn't complain once. And when we got to the top of the tower, she held the back of my shirt so I wouldn't lean too far over the rail. The keychains were $4 each at the gift shop. Nana bought them. She said, "One for each of you, so you remember somebody walked you all the way up." That's the whole story. That's the entire origin of the object in the bag. $4, a gift shop, a woman who's been dead 11 months. I've thought about that day probably 3,000 times since, and here's the thing I can't get past. Delia kept hers. 9 years after I re-lacquered it, through a wedding and 2 moves and a bankruptcy, she still had it on her ring the night she stood in my apartment in the dark. She could have carried a bare key. She didn't. Some part of her still wanted the thing that meant somebody walked you all the way up. She just wanted the house more. I need to tell you about the money, because otherwise none of this makes sense. Delia and her husband Corey Lang opened a mobile detailing business in 2019. 2 vans, a pressure washer, a logo Corey designed himself. It was a fine idea. It was also 2019, which meant that 14 months later it was a very bad idea. And by the time they closed it, they'd put a second mortgage on their house in Wyoming and about $31,000 on cards. I knew all this because Delia told me, not in a confessional way, in the way she tells you things, half joking, testing how you react. We were at a Culver's on 28th Street in October 2 years back, and she was stirring a custard she wasn't eating, and she said, "You ever think about how Nana's sitting on a paid-off house and we're all just like drowning politely?" I laughed. God help me, I laughed because it sounded like a joke. She didn't laugh. Then she said, "You're over there all the time. You could mention it." "Mention what?" "Just that we're struggling. She listens to you." I said something about not wanting to put Nana in the middle of anything, and Delia said sure in the voice that means noted, and we talked about her kids' school pictures, and I drove home and forgot about it for approximately 22 months. I've replayed that custard 3,000 times too. The first 48 hours after Cassell showed me the bag were the quietest of my life, and I have never been more afraid of quiet. Delia stopped calling. That was the tell. She'd called or texted 11 times in the 6 days after the fire, grief-adjacent messages, casseroles offered and never delivered. One voicemail where she cried for 40 seconds about how she couldn't imagine losing everything. Then, on the Thursday, nothing. On the Friday, nothing. She'd been told. Somebody had told her they were looking at her, and she'd gone silent to think. Saturday morning, she posted on Facebook. It was a long one, 4 paragraphs. the kind with a lot of line breaks. It didn't name me. It talked about watching someone you love spiral, about how grief does things to people, about how her family had tried everything, and how she was choosing peace and asking for prayers. Then, buried in the third paragraph like a splinter under a nail. And now there are accusations being made that could ruin lives. And all I can say is that when someone loses everything, sometimes they need someone to blame. 58 comments. Our Aunt Rowena, 2 of my cousins, a woman I went to high school with who I hadn't spoken to since 2011 wrote, "Praying for you, Han. Some people just can't be helped. My mother liked it." That's the detail I gave Detective Marcus Deal when we met on the Monday, and he wrote it down like it mattered, which surprised me. Deal is Kent County Sheriff's Office. 16 years, a big, soft-spoken guy with a bad knee who sat sideways in his chair the whole interview because sitting straight hurt. He took the Facebook post seriously in a way that made me want to put my head on the table and sleep. "This is what people do," he said. "They build the story before the story gets built for them. She's making you unreliable in advance. It's working." "Yeah," he said, "for about 3 more weeks. Then it stops working." He was wrong about the timeline. It was closer to 5. On March 26th, 15 days after the fire, I got a letter from Marston Mutual, renter's insurance. $41 a month, which I'd carried since I was 24 because Nana told me to. Contents coverage up to $40,000. Loss of use, the whole thing. I'd filed the claim on day 2 with a spreadsheet because I'm the kind of person who has a spreadsheet, and I'd assumed it would be the one boring, functional part of this. The letter said my claim was being referred to the Special Investigations Unit and that I was required to submit to an examination under oath. I read it standing up in the parking lot of the Motel 6 on 28th Street where I'd been living for 2 weeks. I read it 4 times. There's a specific physical thing that happens when you understand something bad. For me, it's the backs of my knees. They go loose and hot, and I had to sit down on the curb next to a planter full of cigarette butts. The SIU investigator was a woman named Dana Whitlock, 11 years, former claims adjuster, a voice on the phone like a dental hygienist. She was perfectly polite. She explained that a fire of incendiary origin at an insured's residence triggers an automatic referral. She explained that the EUO was a contractual obligation, not an accusation. Then she asked me whether I'd had any recent financial pressures. I said no. She said, "Our records show you took a personal loan of $8,000 in September." I had. To replace the transmission in my 2014 Outback and cover the deductible on Nana's last hospital stay before we brought her home, because Medicare doesn't cover everything, and I wasn't going to argue with a billing department while my grandmother was dying in the next room. Yes, that's accurate. "And you're the sole beneficiary of an estate currently in contest?" There it was. I want to be very clear about what was happening. Somebody had called Marston Mutual. Somebody had given them a narrative. Unstable sister, financial pressure, motive, opportunity. Whitlock wouldn't confirm it. She didn't have to. Nobody at an insurance company independently discovers a probate contest in Kent County 15 days into a claim. The claim went into pending investigation status, which meant no contents payout, which meant no loss of use money, which meant the Motel 6 was now on my card at $71 a night, and I had 11 days of savings left. I called Priscilla Hahn from that curb. Priscilla is the estate attorney Nana hired, 28 years doing probate in Grand Rapids, a small woman with enormous glasses, who talks to you like she's already 3 steps down the road, and mildly annoyed you're not there yet. She drafted the will. She'd been my one point of stability since November. "They filed," she said, before I could say anything. "This morning, I was about to call you." Delia's attorney had filed a formal contest in Kent County Probate Court. The grounds were undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. The petition alleged that I isolated the decedent from her remaining family, controlled her medications, and arranged and directed the drafting of the instrument to my sole benefit. Controlled her medications. I sat on that curb and I looked at a Wendy's sign across the parking lot, and I thought about the night in September when Nana couldn't get comfortable, and I sat on the floor next to her bed from 2 in the morning until 6 with my hand on her shin, because the pressure of a hand on the shin helped her more than anything in the comfort kit did, and how at some point she said, "You're a good girl, Ivy. You were always the good one." And I said, "Don't say that. Delia loves you." And she said, "I didn't say she didn't." Controlled her medications. "Ivy," Priscilla's voice. "Are you there? They're going to say I killed her. They're going to imply it without ever saying it, because saying it is defamation and implying it is advocacy. Listen to me. This filing is a gift." "How is this a gift?" "Because it's a document," she said, "under oath, with their theory of the case locked in. 6 weeks ago, they had nothing to lose. Now they have a filing they have to defend." The escalation had a rhythm to it, and looking back, I can see it clearly, the way you can only ever see it afterward. Every time I found solid ground, something was already underneath it, chewing. Now they have a filing they have to defend. The escalation had a rhythm to it, and looking back, I can see it clearly, the way you can only ever see it afterward. Every time I found solid ground, something was already underneath it, chewing. March 31st, my rental application for a 1-bedroom in Easttown was denied, not for credit. The property manager, who was apologetic and about 25, mentioned that they'd received a call during the reference check. I asked who from. She said she wasn't allowed to say, and then said in a lower voice, it was a family member. And I said thank you and hung up and sat in my car in the lot for 11 minutes. April 2nd, my hospice director, Bettina Cruz, RN, MSN, 23 years, the best clinical leader I've ever worked under, called me into her office and closed the door, which she never does. There had been a complaint to Rivershore Hospice's compliance line, anonymous. It alleged that a nurse on staff had diverted controlled medications from a home patient. Bettina looked like she hadn't slept. I want to say this first. I don't believe it. Nobody here believes it. And that doesn't matter because I have obligations. The patient named in the complaint was Ruth Callahan, my grandmother, who was not a Rivershore patient because I'd cared for her privately, on my own time, off the clock, which meant there was no chart, no MAR, no count sheet, no nurse's note, nothing to prove anything either way except my word. That was the point. That's what makes it elegant, if you're the kind of person who admires that sort of thing. They picked the 11-month stretch of my career with no documentation. I was placed on paid administrative leave pending review. I had to self-report to Lara, the state licensing department, within 30 days. Bettina walked me to my car and hugged me in the parking lot and said, whatever this is, finish it fast. April 4th, I sat for 4 hours and 11 minutes of examination under oath with Dana Whitlock and a Marston Mutual attorney in a conference room downtown with a court reporter. They asked me to account for my whereabouts on the night of March 10th into March 11th. They asked about the $8,000 loan. They asked whether I'd ever expressed anger about my family's financial expectations. They asked whether I'd taken any photographs of my belongings in the weeks before the fire. I had for a renter's inventory in January on Nana's advice, which is now the single most suspicious thing I have ever done in my life. At hour 3, Whitlock asked, Ms. Myers, are you aware that your sister has provided a written statement to us? And I said the only true thing I had left. I'm aware she has a lot to gain. By the second week of April, I had stopped sleeping in any real sense. I'd get 4 hours in the Motel 6, then wake at 3:40 with my heart going like I'd sprinted, and lie there doing the thing where you argue with someone who isn't in the room. I lost 11 pounds. I know that because Bettina made me get a physical. My blood pressure, which has been 108/68 my entire adult life, was 146/94, and the PA who took it asked me twice if I was okay, and I said, yep, in a bright voice, and then cried in her parking lot. Here's what nobody tells you about being the target of a coordinated lie. The exhausting part isn't the lie. It's the arithmetic. Every single day I had to decide what to spend energy on. Fight the insurance, or fight the probate, or fight the licensing complaint, or find housing, or eat. There were 4 fires and 1 bucket, and the whole time, this low hum underneath. They're my family, not as sentiment, as logistics. Every one of these attacks required somebody to know things, to know I had a filing cabinet, to know about the $8,000 loan, to know Nana had no Rivershore chart, to know which property manager I'd applied with. That knowledge came from inside the house. My father called once, on April 8th. Dale Myers, 66, retired maintenance supervisor, a man who has never once in my hearing finished a difficult sentence. Kiddo, this is a lot. It has. Long pause. Traffic somewhere behind him, so he wasn't at the house. He'd driven somewhere to make this call. If there was a way to make it stop, if everybody could just come out even, wouldn't that be, Dad, did Mom ask you to call me? Silence long enough that I heard his turn signal. You take care of yourself, Ivy, he said, and hung up. I want to record that I did not cry after that one. I sat very still, and I felt something in me finish. Not break. Finish, the way a fever finishes. 33 years of waiting for that man to say a whole sentence, and he used his one call to open negotiations. On April 14th, Priscilla Hahn called and told me to come to her office at 4 and to eat something first, which was ominous. There was a settlement offer. Delia's attorney proposed. The contest withdrawn. The compliance complaint clarified as a misunderstanding. The statement to Marston Mutual supplemented, in exchange for the Sycamore house being sold, and the proceeds split 50-50, plus my written agreement not to pursue any civil claims against any family member, and a 4th term, which is the one I want you to sit with. Petitioner requests that the beneficiary submit a letter to the Michigan State Police Fire Investigation Unit indicating that she does not wish to pursue charges related to the March 11th fire and that she believes the origin determination may have been in error. They wanted me to unreport the arson. Priscilla put her hands flat on the desk. I'm required to present this to you and to advise you neutrally on the financial terms. So, financially, it's not insane. Litigation costs on a contested estate run $30,000 to $60,000. The house needs a roof. Contests take 14 to 20 months. And non-financially? She took her glasses off, which I had never seen her do. Ivy, in 28 years, I have never seen a settlement demand that asks a client to retract a criminal complaint. That paragraph is not a legal strategy. That paragraph is a confession with a filing fee. I asked her what happened if I said no. Then in 8 days, you sit for a deposition where opposing counsel asks you, on the record, whether you ever administered morphine to your grandmother and how much, and whether anyone else was present, and you answer honestly, and they clip it, and it becomes the thing your family says about you for the rest of your life. The offer had a deadline, 5:09 p.m., April 22nd, the same day as the pre-trial conference. I had 8 days. I said no on day 1. Then I unsaid it on day 3. At 2 in the morning, in a motel bed, with a calculator app open, because I am not a saint and $150,000 is a house and a life and a way to stop being terrified in parking lots. Then I said no again on day 4. What changed on day 4 is that I finally cleaned out my car. The Outback survived the fire. It was parked at the far end of the lot, 40 yards from my building. Untouched. I'd been living out of it. And on Friday the 17th, I was pulling trash out of the passenger footwell at a speedway on Plainfield. Angry cleaning, the way you do when there's nothing else you can control. And I yanked at something wedged under the seat, and it was the suction mount for my dash camera, a Vantru N4. Corey had actually recommended it. That's the joke of my life. After somebody clipped my mirror in a Meijer lot in 2022. 3 channels. And a parking mode I'd turned on and then forgotten about for 2.5 years because it lives in a menu and I'm not a car person. I sat in that driver's seat with the mount in my hand and I did not move for a while. Parking mode is motion and impact triggered. When the car is off, the camera stays in a low power state and wakes when something moves in front of it. It writes short clips to a locked folder on the SD card. And when the card fills, it starts eating itself. Oldest. First, 128GB card. Parking clips at reduced frame rate. I'd been driving that car constantly for 5 weeks, generating loop footage every single day. It was day 37. I called Cassell from the gas station and I was talking too fast and he made me say it twice. Then he said a word I won't repeat and told me not to touch the camera again. The forensic examiner was Elias Park, certified in digital forensics. Contracted through a private lab in Ada that the county uses for overflow, mid-40s, very calm, wore a Detroit Tigers cap indoors. He put my SD card in a write blocker at 6:15 that evening and imaged it before he did anything else, and he explained chain of custody to me twice because he could see I needed something procedural to hold on to. Best case, he said, parking events are in their own directory, and the loop's been eating the driving footage first. Worst case, it's gone, and I can tell you it's gone tonight instead of in a week. He called me at 11:40 p.m. He'd recovered 14 parking mode clips from the relevant window. 4 of them were from the night of March 10th, 11th. I asked what was on them, and he said kindly that he wasn't the person who got to tell me that. Detective Deal and Deputy Fire Marshal Cassell showed me 2 of the 4 clips on Monday, April 20th, in a room with a television on a rolling cart, and they had a victim advocate present, which I understood only afterward to be a warning. The first clip is 31 seconds. Timestamp 1:47:12 a.m. My camera faces forward, out toward the row of parking spaces and the walkway to Building C. It's dark, and the footage is grainy and green-black. 2 figures cross the frame from right to left, 40 feet out, walking fast, both in hooded jackets. The shorter one is carrying something in the right hand, low, with the elbow locked, the specific way you carry a container with liquid in it so it doesn't slosh. The second clip is 19 seconds. Timestamp 2:03:48 a.m. Same 2 figures, left to right now, moving faster, and the shorter one stops, right there in frame, maybe 35 feet from my bumper, and turns and says something to the taller one, and the audio channel, the interior mic, which picks up more than you'd think through a cracked open window on a cold night in a concrete lot with nothing else making noise. The audio channel got it. 2 sentences, enhanced later by the lab, but honestly, I didn't need the enhancement. I've known that voice since before I had language. I heard it through a wall when I was 8 years old, arguing about a layoff. I heard it tell me my apartment burning down was not their problem. Walk. Don't run, you'll look like you're running. And then, 4 seconds later, she'll land on her feet. She always does. I made a sound in that room that I have never made before or since. Deal put his hand on the table near mine. Not touching, just near. My mother. Rhonda Myers, 63, licensed real estate salesperson, First Presbyterian, 32 years married, a woman who alphabetizes her spice rack, standing in a parking lot at 2:03 in the morning with a 5-gallon can, telling her older daughter not to run. The taller figure, the one who did run, 2 steps before catching herself, had a key ring in her left hand. You can see it swing. You can see something small and pale catch the light off the walkway lamp. She dropped it in my apartment, not in the fire. Before. The fire in the dark, kneeling by a filing cabinet with a can in her hand. And then she went home, and she waited 9 hours, and she called me crying about a metal box. Everything after that happened faster than I could process it, and I'm going to lay it out plainly, because plain is what it deserves. Deal already had the gas station. He'd pulled it 3 weeks. Deal already had the gas station. He'd pulled it 3 weeks earlier, and it had been sitting in a folder with no name attached to it, because a woman in a hood buying gas at 1:12 a.m. is not a crime, and there was nobody to match her to. Speedway, Plainfield Avenue, Pump 6. A red 5-gallon HDPE container filled with 4.1 gallons of regular, paid in cash. The clerk's angle got the car in the background at the edge of the lot. A silver 2016 Honda Accord, plate partially legible, 4 characters, enough. My mother has driven the same Accord since 2016. She keeps a fisherman's friend tin in the cup holder and a St. Christopher medal clipped to the visor, and she once did not speak to me for a week because I put a coffee in it without a lid. Delia's phone was the rest of it. Her carrier records placed her device connecting to a tower covering my complex from 1:31 a.m. to 2:11 a.m. on March 11th. Her written statement to Marston Mutual said she was home asleep. That's not a discrepancy. That's a felony, in writing, notarized, submitted to an insurance company across state lines. The container turned up in the Lang's garage, behind a dead pressure washer, in a search executed on April 21st. She hadn't even thrown it away. $14 at Ace. She'd burned down a building and kept the receipt in the bag it came in. Corey Lang was arrested the same morning and gave a statement within 6 hours. He hadn't been there. He'd known. That's the whole of what he did. He knew on the 9th and he knew on the 12th, and he went to work at the RV dealership in between. His attorney negotiated a plea to accessory after the fact in exchange for full cooperation, and Corey sat in a room with Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Karen Voss and told her about a conversation in his kitchen on March 8th, where his wife and his mother-in-law discussed out loud at a table with a laptop open whether a will could be contested more easily if the original signed copy couldn't be produced. They didn't know about the safe deposit box. They never knew. That's the thing that's kept me up more than the fire. The entire operation was built on a guess. They looked at a filing cabinet through a window and guessed. The pretrial conference on April 22nd lasted 6 minutes. I sat in the second row of Kent County Probate Court in a blazer I'd bought at a Goodwill on Alpine for $9 because everything I owned was ash. Priscilla Hahn sat beside me and did not look at opposing counsel once. Delia's attorney requested to withdraw the petition. Priscilla objected to withdrawal without prejudice and moved for dismissal with prejudice plus costs, citing the pending criminal matter and Nana's no contest clause, because there was a no contest clause. Article 9. Priscilla had drafted it, and when I'd asked her in November why an 81-year-old woman with 2 grandchildren needed one, she'd said, because your grandmother asked for it specifically, and I'd let it go. I hadn't let it go, actually. I'd asked Nana, in her kitchen, at the table with the vinyl cloth, about 6 weeks before she died. I said, Nana, why are we doing all this? And she said, because your mother has been counting this house since she was 40 years old and I have been watching her count it. The judge granted dismissal with prejudice. Delia's contingent share, the $60,000 Nana had left her, which nobody had bothered to mention in the Facebook post, forfeited under Article 9. She'd had $60,000. She burned down a building over the difference. There's a video, and I need to tell you about it, because it's the piece that turned a case into a wall. When Nana executed the will in October, Priscilla Hahn recorded the signing and a 14-minute capacity interview. Standard practice, she told me, when a contest is anticipated. Camera on a tripod, date stamped, 2 witnesses, and a notary in the room. I had never watched it. Priscilla had offered in December, and I'd said not yet. And then it was March, and my apartment was gone, and I forgot it existed. I watched it on April 29th in a conference room, alone, because I asked to be alone. She's in the blue cardigan. She's thinner than I remember letting myself see. Priscilla asks her the standard questions: name, date, the nature and extent of her property, the natural objects of her bounty. And Nana answers all of them crisply, and when Priscilla asks her to identify her living descendants, she says, my daughter Rhonda, my granddaughters Delia and Ivy, and Delia's 2, Mason and Presley, who I would like it noted I have not seen since Easter. Then Priscilla asks why she's leaving the residence to one granddaughter, and Nana looks at the camera. Not at Priscilla, at the camera, like she knew. In March, my daughter came here and asked me to take a reverse mortgage on this house and give her the money. When I said no, she didn't call me for 5 weeks. In June, Delia asked me to co-sign a loan and told me it was for the children's school and it was not for the children's school. And every Tuesday and every Thursday and most Sundays for the better part of a year, Ivy has come here and washed me and fed me and slept in that chair, and she has never once, not one time, asked me for $1. A pause. She adjusts her sleeve. I'm not doing this because I love one more than the other. I'm doing it because I'm the only one left who can say out loud who showed up. 14 minutes. Date stamped October 9th. 2 witnesses, a notary, and a woman who could not have known that 6 months later, a jury would need to hear her say it. Karen Voss played 11 seconds of it at Delia's plea hearing, over an objection that was overruled. Just the last part. Who showed up? The charges, since people always want the specifics. Rhonda Myers was charged with arson of a dwelling house, MCL 750. 72. A first-degree offense in Michigan because the building was occupied, and it was occupied. There were 9 other units and a family with a newborn in C4, plus conspiracy, plus insurance fraud, plus tampering with evidence. Delia Lang was charged identically, plus a separate count for the false statement to Marston Mutual. Corey Lang pleaded to accessory after the fact. Delia took a plea in September, arson of a dwelling and conspiracy, in exchange for the fraud counts. 7 to 20 years, with a minimum she'll serve at least 5 of. She allocuted in a voice I could barely hear, and when the judge asked her whether anyone had directed her, she said, "My mother told me where the cabinet was." My mother went to trial. She was convicted in February on all 4 counts, after a jury deliberated for 2 hours and 10 minutes, which her attorney reportedly described as not ideal. 12 to 30 years. She's at Huron Valley. Her real estate license was revoked by Lara in March. There's a public disciplinary record you can look up in about 40 seconds. Marston Mutual paid my contents claim in full, $34,180, plus loss of use retroactive to March 11th, and Dana Whitlock called me personally, which she did not have to do, and said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry it went the way it went." And I said, "You were doing your job," and I meant it mostly. Rivershore Hospice cleared me in 6 weeks. The anonymous compliance complaint was traced to a Gmail account created 11 days after the fire from an IP address at my parents' house. Bettina Cruz reinstated me with back pay and put a plant on my desk, a pothos, which is a joke she has never once explained and which I love her for. Lara closed the licensing matter with no action. It's not on my record. It was on my record for 4 months and 11 days, and I can tell you what every one of those days felt like. I moved into the house on Sycamore in June. It needed the roof. It needed a water heater and a furnace and the back steps rebuilt. And the whole thing ate about $19,000 of what I had. And I did most of the painting myself over 4 weekends with the windows open. Her kitchen still smells like her. I don't know how that's possible after 2 years and a full repaint. I've stopped trying to figure it out and started just standing in it for a minute in the mornings. The hardest thing wasn't the trial. It was Mason and Presley, 14 and 11. They live with Corey now, in a rental in Granville. And for a long time they didn't want to see me because for a long time the only version of this they'd heard was their mother's. Presley started emailing me in November. Short ones, mostly about a horse show. In February she asked me if it was true, and I thought about it for 2 days, and then I wrote back, yes. And she carried me up a beach when I was 8, and I'm never going to stop knowing both of those things at the same time. She writes back now every couple weeks. Mason doesn't. That's his right. My father lives in the house on Bristol by himself. He was never charged. There's no evidence he knew anything before the 11th, and I believe that, which is its own kind of indictment. He came to one day of the trial and sat in the back row and left at lunch. He sends me a card at Christmas with $20 in it, the way he has since I was 6, and I don't cash them and I don't send them back. And they're in a drawer in Nana's kitchen, and I don't know what that is. Grief, probably. You can grieve people who are still driving around. The letter came in April, 13 months after the fire. Michigan Department of Corrections envelope, my name in my mother's handwriting, which is the same handwriting that was on every permission slip and every birthday card of my childhood, and that is a genuinely obscene thing to receive. 3 pages. I'll summarize because she doesn't deserve the word count. Page 1 was about her health and the food. Page 2 was about how she'd had time to reflect, and how she hopes I've had time to reflect too, and about how we all said things, and about how the trial brought out the worst in everyone, which is a sentence doing a truly heroic amount of work. Page 3 was the ask. There's a filing. There's an appellate attorney who thinks there are grounds. There's a retainer of $9,000. And the house, she wrote, is worth more than it was, isn't it, with the new roof? At the bottom, underlined twice, I'm still your mother. I have nowhere else to go. I sat at Nana's kitchen table with the vinyl cloth, and I read it 3 times, and then I got a piece of paper. I wrote 1 line. I didn't sign it. It's really not my problem to solve. You'll figure it out. You always land on your feet. I walked it to the mailbox at the end of the driveway in my socks because I didn't want to spend 1 more minute thinking about it. And on the way back, I stopped at the front door and stood there for a second with my keys in my hand. The lighthouse is still on my ring. Mine, not hers. Hers is in a Kent County evidence locker, tagged and photographed, Exhibit 14, and it will stay there. Mine's greened up again at the seams. I've stopped relacquering it. It's $4 of brass from a gift shop at the top of a tower a 1.5 miles up a beach, and it's the only thing I own that came through everything. And it hangs on the key to a house that my mother spent her whole life counting. She never once made it up the stairs.